So, hello, Jim. Welcome to my podcast, One for the Road. It's your morning, I believe, because you're over in the States, right?
I'm in the state of South Carolina. The sun is shining. It's hot as Hades, as it always is in August. I'm not complaining. We have air conditioning.
Wonderful. And how have you been lately?
I am not complaining. We have a big family, kids that are growing and just about out the door. And my wife, Laura, and I are getting to enjoy a little bit of the freedoms of empty nesting. And I've got creativity still coming from my heart, and I have places to be creative, which I'm truly blessed for.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to get into that a little bit later. But as people know, my lovely listeners, they love a life story, and you've got quite one to tell, actually. So let's wind it all the way back, Jim, to the beginning when you was a wee little lad walking about on this earth. What was that like for you?
Oh, I was a wee little lad. I was a big little baby, though. My mom had five of us in 60, 62, 64, 67, and 71. So we had a big family that was growing up in the middle of America in a suburb of Chicago, Illinois. So we were out sort of in the cornfields in a smaller community. And that's where we landed after a bunch of moves when I was younger. We didn't really settle down until I got to be about 9 or 10 years old. And I was the middle of the five. And we were loved, we were sheltered, we were fed. We didn't have a lot, but I never went hungry. And we were taught how to love. And we were in a church that I wasn't too excited about from a very young age. So I had some judgment over that and some pushback. And but it was a nice upbringing there. We had sports around us. I was obsessed. I had a few things sort of tugging for my attention in my heart and head as a kid. And it was probably sports, because I would chase anything, any ball, or give me a bat and I would learn to hit a ball. And so we had a lot: basketball, baseball, American football, soccer, tennis. And so I did a lot of that, as did my siblings. And I also had music. We had music in our home, no instruments, but a mom who had really cool taste. For a lady that was born in 1939, she was on the rock and roll hippie side of Elvis, and my dad probably leaned back towards more of the traditional older new rock and roll. My mom brought in R&B and Motown and British rock and just a cool variety of music that really lit me up. So I also was born a drummer. I've learned some other instruments by teaching, but I truly was the kid who could not sit still without tapping his fingertips or his feet or clanking my teeth to try and be less noisy. And I did end up annoying a fair amount of teachers and authority figures with my inability to stop that rhythm in my head that just was there permanently. I was hearing drum beats. I was picking the drums out of the music I was listening to. And I guess finally by about seventh grade, they decided that drum lessons would be cheaper than therapy for this little Jimmy who couldn't stop tapping and manifesting this rhythm that was in his head. And so we got me drum lessons. So when I was 13, I started to organize that nonstop rhythm in my head onto a drum kit. And that was a game changer for me. I got to start dreaming and seeing, a drummer could be a drummer in a band, and I could be like Keith Moon, hopefully not fully like Keith Moon, or John Bonham, hopefully not like John Bonham fully, but the good drummers. And so that was great. So I had sports, I had music going, and starting to pay attention to the girls. But when I was 14, I had sort of a moment that altered my course a little bit. I had found myself about to start our, grade 9, which is, 14 years old. And I was moving from a little Christian school where I'd had the same 25 classmates from the beginning to a school that had 2,000 kids, 500 my own age. And I was excited to leave my Christian teaching behind and not have to deal with nuns and priests and go into a more progressive and I guess liberal setting where there was kids, you could smoke cigarettes in the lounge at school. It was 1979, and in that summer before entering the school, I found myself around 14-year-old kids who were using drugs and alcohol one night. And, I'd been told by my parents, by the police, because I had older brothers, the police were always visiting, by the priests at my school, that it was illegal, alcohol, drugs, it was dangerous, and you really had to be careful. But as soon as I saw kids my age using it, I went right for it. There was nothing that was going to stop me from wanting the thrill of what they were doing. It appeared like they were having more fun. I was a little deviant. I was a thrill seeker. So the fact it was illegal and unlawful was part of the allure. But also there were girls and boys there, and I went right for it. So I started to smoke a little bit and drink a little bit, and I loved the feeling. I mean, there's no doubt that when you put a chemical in your body, it changes your mind, and mine was. And I thought, I love this, right? A little woozy, a little dizzy, maybe felt a little taller and stronger and funnier. And the girls looked instantly a little cuter. And the end of that first night, I ended up on my knees on the side yard, vomiting in the bushes, hiding it from my parents, who would have thought that was a terrible thing. And I, instead of, thinking, wow, be careful, Jim, this is a dangerous thing, I did the opposite. And maybe that's sort of the something in me that's unique, or we call it sometimes an ism. I instead looked at it like a competitive sport and said, man, I failed that first time. The score at the end of night one was alcohol 1 and Jim 0. I'll do better next week when I have this opportunity again. And so that's how I went about my drinking and drugging from that point. I was a weekend warrior through high school. I partied with kids. I had by that time become singularly obsessed with what we call soccer. So I was very sports minded and wanted to keep in shape and loved it. But I balanced that with the partying, and we were into all sorts of things, whatever anybody could come up with out there in the farmlands. And sometimes it was acid or cocaine or booze or beer, weed. We were willing to attempt anything, pills. And this was obviously predating a lot of the more dangerous things we see in pills these days. So we didn't think we were in any harm at all. I got to go to the university to play soccer, my dream. I moved from at age 18 from Chicago all the way to Columbia, South Carolina, where I was going to try out for the varsity team. I was the only player the coach took in 1983, and I was thrilled. I thought I was stepping into the biggest dream. I'd get 4 years of soccer, maybe even opportunity to go to the next level. And the roller coaster that I had been on, which was a weekend warrior with partying and balancing grades and relationships and approval of my parents and authority figures, got a little rockier in college. It took me 6 years, for instance, to get through a 4-year degree. So I was obviously not exactly focused. Soccer was my main major, and books were a sideline, and they were well behind the partying and the girls too. But that roller coaster, seeking highs, which I was achieving on the field and in my partying, always meant that there was a bigger crash at the bottom to come down. And so I started to suffer more from some uncomfortable relationships and consequences in my decision-making. And at the end, there was me, sitting there with a degree in my hand, a soccer dream that had ended. I was left with just a good mullet and short shorts and wasn't sure where to turn.
Yeah. Do you know what though, Jim? What you said there, I think, when were you born? What year were you born?
I'm a 64. So
yeah. So you were born 1964 and your mum was born 1939, right?
Yeah.
Same year. Exactly the same. So when you were saying it, and you were saying about your mum as well, like it was really ringing true with me, all of these things. I think there's too many similarities. And I started drinking when I was 14 as well. And I threw up in my stereo lid. I had a record player. and it had one of those fold down lids. And I remember ripping off the lid and throwing up in it. And when I woke up in the morning, it was by my bed. And I thought, oh no, I've messed up my record player, right? Not, oh God, I was so ill last night. And the weird thing is, if it was a food and we got food poisoning, we probably wouldn't eat it again for a long time, if ever at all. But because it's this drug, I think we just remembered the high that it gave us, which took us back again.
Well, it is definitely something I was seeking, and I didn't know anything that there might be a void in me that I was trying to fill in, or that there could be a connection between my seeking an escape through drugs and alcohol and my emotional disabilities. I didn't see the connection when we're young, especially, right? We look at it's evidence-based. There's throw up in my turntable. That's bad. And that's the worst thing. So I'm going to not think about how I got to that point. I'm just going to think about how I can get a new turntable.
Yeah. Or chat up the next girl, or be with my mates and make them laugh. We remember the good bits, right? But then it starts to get out of control, doesn't it? Like, so at 14, it was just randomly going up the shops and asking the adults to buy some beer at the off license. But then you start developing a relationship with it, don't you?
Right. When it becomes what society or says is legal, especially just, let's say, booze or beer or wine, when that becomes legal in my life, I then sort of think to myself, wow, this is okay. It's the one glue that is so accepted in our societies where alcohol, it's a natural life. It's what we do. It is like breathing to many people. And so I thought, now that I'm in that legal status, I'm okay. And I think I probably started measuring myself as the consequences came with by moving the lines of right and wrong, or good and bad, or success and failure. If I wasn't in the back of a cop car and my friend was, I thought I was okay. Even if we were, partying and drunk and belligerent, if I didn't get caught, then I was okay. So I always found people to hang around that had bigger consequences, and that, allowed me to feel like I was okay. And if I did something more drastically wrong, I would justify it with rationalization. I'll move the line, move that, well, it's not that bad, or I won't do that again. It was a one-off. And so I was constantly doing this rationalization and justification during that period of my life. I was in my 20s and felt, I have a college degree, and I would shortly, or right before getting that degree, join and meet my bandmates who were in college at the same time, in the same predicament, with a degree, but no desire to sit at a desk. And we wanted to write songs. So that enters my guys, Hootie and the Blowfish.
Wow, we're talking to her about this. So how did that all start?
Well, the music was growing in my heart through my teens, and I'd learned to play a little guitar and piano and was singing a bit. So I knew I wanted to write songs. And after my long 6 years in college, the timing ended up being perfect. It was quite serendipitous that Darius Rucker and Mark Bryan and Dean Felber, who already had this little band, Hootie and the Blowfish, were graduating, and their drummer was leaving, and they wanted to concentrate on writing music, and that was where my focus was. So it just was great timing. I knew Mark from a audio production class at the university, and he said they were going to be auditioning drummers, and they want to become original artists, and I just had to be there. So I had written a few songs at the time and sat down with an audition for them in probably August of '89, and it went great. We were still playing a lot of cover material, and knew that people like to dance and have a good time and sing along, but we were also writing our own music immediately. And I brought in a song that was one of the first good songs I ever wrote, and it ended up being an important song for the band, called Hold My Hand. And it was, my sort of kid in his mid-20s plea to the world to get along and stop oppressing others, and everybody have peace and let's help each other. Meanwhile, I didn't know I was growing in my illness in my association with alcohol at the same time. But I just brought that song in. They loved it. We hit it off, and we started doing what they call paying your dues. We bought a little Ford van, and we hit the highway. We had day jobs at the same time, so we were living right along the poverty line. But life was quite simple. Life was quite good. We didn't have sort of a lot of responsibilities other than to try and get better at our craft and be willing to take any gig we could for the opportunity to get seen by a record label. And so we did that in 89, 90, 91, 92, 93. We're putting out original music independently, and I'm loving every minute of the geographic changes I would get. One night in Raleigh, North Carolina, if I have a consequence, if I overdo it, it doesn't matter because we're on to Washington, D.C. the next night. And if I have a bad scene there, well, we're on to somewhere in Virginia the next night. And I never considered it at the time, but I did find that quite convenient to sort of feel like I was escaping the traumas that I was part of. And so we kept traveling, and we traveled for about 5 solid years, working our butts off and starting to party a little bit more.
I've just finished watching a series over here called Daisy Jones and the Six. Have you heard of it?
I have. And is that lightly or directly based on another band?
A band, and there was a guy in there that got in trouble with alcohol and drugs. And you saying it like that, it just brings it back to that, where they were climbing their way up. They were doing a lot of traveling, and it's a tough business, isn't it? And
we enjoyed it. It's meant for young people, so we were right in there. Mid-20s, and of energy and desires, and so it didn't ever seem rough. Honestly, we money wasn't ever the point for us.
No,
it was making music, meeting girls, and if we got paid in beer and gas money, that was enough. So it never felt tough. That was why we kept going, even when we weren't.
When you're at that age as well, it does. When I was in my 20s, it's almost that's what you do. We didn't know the consequences of it. I used to get in at 5 a.m. from a club and go to work at 7. And by 9, my hangover was over, and I was thinking about the next night out. Do you know what I mean? It's weird, isn't it? But so at that point in your life where you was touring around, what was the kind of drinking you were doing? Just after a gig or before a gig?
Yeah, it was functional. I really wasn't so obsessed in my 20s that I was ever thinking about drinking in the morning. Of course, drinking in the day wouldn't have been a problem, except we worked at night, especially when we started getting paid a little more for our appearances and our concerts. I couldn't ever afford. It would be stupid to drink in the day when you had to be on stage at 9 or 10 or even 11 o'clock at night. And in the clubs, it is late. Your gig might be midnight to 2 a.m. and that wouldn't have been unusual. So day drinking wasn't really ever going to be a part of mine. And I also knew I can drink on my job. And that's maybe the blessing and the curse of the entertainment or the music business, is that what's wrong with seeing the musicians up there getting drunk on stage? That's sort of part of the glory and the circus of it. And so that became very regular. And I started probably when we were off the road. We might play 3 nights on a weekend. But when we came home, I was also liking to, hit the clubs and hit the bars. And for a while, I didn't notice it, and maybe no one did. I wasn't really taking nights off. There would never a reason to stay home and not drink, and no one was calling me out on it. No one was necessarily intervening and saying, "I'm worried about you," because all the youthful energy makes up for it. If you can get to work at 7 a.m. after staying up all night, like you said, and your hangover's done by 9, who cares? So we did a lot of that, and we were simple guys. It was mostly just, we loved our beers, and I started getting into booze. Whatever I could mix up in vodka or rum or whatever would be good. We did a lot of shots. Jägermeister seemed to be the rage back then, so we were always doing a lot of shots on stage, and people were bringing us free booze. It was it was like a little race. When you hit the stage, you start drinking. 2 or 3 hours later, you've got a great buzz. You've sweated a lot of it out, and you're going to get paid and you're going to get to meet some girls and you feel accomplished and you're midway into a good drunken night. And many people at that point would have just turned it off and said good night. But I started to be fascinated by what happens after the show, which might include 3 to 4 more hours of partying and carrying on. And that's really where the trouble is. It's not on stage.
I've interviewed several musicians on this podcast, and believe me, whether it's a UK thing, but they drank before a gig quite heavily.
Wow.
And one guy was on stage and was singing, and the mic was 10 foot away, and his mate had to come and drag him to the mic, right? But there's also Cher Adelican, who's the bass guitarist of the Gorillaz, the band the Gorillaz. And he stopped drinking. And he said the hardest part was after a gig because everyone's partying and he's sitting in this hotel room and he's full of adrenaline and the high from the gig. And it's almost, what do I do now? So he really struggled with that after show kind of thing where he went back with his tail between his legs because he was the non-drinker and struggled with that. So there's a lot of elements to it. But at what point did you really get the break then?
Well, we got a little lucky, but let me define luck the way it was posted on the gymnasium in my school growing up. It said, luck is where preparation meets opportunity. Fair enough. It's a sort of two elements that are important there. And after working 5 years, we got signed to Atlantic Records, the home of, Aretha Franklin, Zeppelin, all these big Ray Charles. We're just on cloud nine. We record a record. We're still a baby band for all intents and purposes, and they put it out, and it's not getting much traction after the first few months, except there are some radio stations playing the song I had written 5 years previous, Hold My Hand. And this late night comedian talk show host, who was the biggest at the time, David Letterman, hears Hold My Hand on his way home from work one night and calls his booker and says, get me the guys on my show that will sing Hold My Hand, and says, we are thrilled. This is a big break. And we go up there to play the show, and we're nervous wrecks. We're on television. We don't know if this might be the last time we ever get to be on TV. We have some self-belief, but we also know that it's a cruel business, and this could be a big break, or it might just be a shot in the dark. And we go on there in 3.5 minutes, and with the help of David Letterman, sort of falling in love with the band name and our music. In 3.5 minutes, our trajectory changes forever. We're in front of 6.5 million fans who like the song, who start calling the radio stations in their different cities across America, and suddenly Hold My Hand is zipping up the rock charts. And that was the change. That was the break. That was the moment where suddenly people could see us instead of trudging around and playing shows, 600 people in a club one night at a time. We're in front of 6 million viewers.
That's
and they
incredible.
like it. Yeah. So it was well received. And that just started a faster upward trajectory. Suddenly we're getting more invitations. Suddenly the album is charting. The album debuted at 127 on the top 200, and it had sort of sat around 160 on the charts several months later until Letterman. And then so it starts creeping into the top 100, the top 75. By the time the next May comes, and we're sitting in London, actually, doing a gig there, trying to get our British fan base together, our album goes #1 in the States for the first time.
Wow.
And we again lift up a shot of Jägermeister to toast the moment and hit the stage. And gosh, I can't remember where we it might have been Shepherd's Bush or somewhere that night.
Hammersmith, Apollo.
Yeah,
maybe.
It wasn't a big place, but we were happy to be growing, still there. We were a new band. And so, that was it. And we came home that summer to play an amphitheater tour, 20,000 people a night, sold out. We had to make a big change, and that sort of accepting and trying to figure out how to do those big places. And we worked hard, we partied hard, but it was still pretty basic. We were simple guys Hard drugs hadn't entered the picture at all. And we rode for about 5 years, where we put out our biggest first album, Cracked Review. We followed it up with Fairweather Johnson, which went #1 a few years later. We followed that up with a third album, which went #1 in the late 90s. And eventually, as happens in the industry, the fans, some of them move on to the next new band, the next with a cooler sound and tighter jeans and cooler hair. And I'm facing the reality, and we all sort of are, but in my personal way, I don't know what to do with the fact that we have seen our best days. It's in the rear view. We're now 2001. Life is getting a little dark. 9/11 has happened. I'm starting to use cocaine regularly to help my drinking, which is getting worse. And I have a few friends in our crew that I realize are about to give me an intervention. And this is an important point for me, because I understand they're whispering that they're worried about someone in the organization. I didn't know who they were talking about, and they didn't know I was listening. This person has been prone to some temper flare-ups. They were worried about who he was hanging out with well after the shows in these weird places. And I thought, honestly, that I could burst in and say, let me help with this person. They sound like they're sick. And as they told my name to each other, they said, we're worried about Sony, about Jim. My just chin dropped. I was so heartbroken that they were all worried about me. And a normal person probably at that point would take that sign and that evidence and say, you got me. I'm turning myself in. I'm out of control. I need some help. And I didn't. I went the other way and committed to hiding it better, to not upsetting people, to isolating in hotel rooms, to not letting him know how long I had been drinking during a period or how much I'd been drinking. And it was lies, secrets, and more darkness.
You adapted. I did that, Jim. A few people down the pub started mentioning, Dave, you're always drunk, mate, and you're looking terrible and whatnot. So I used to just minimalize my drinking in the pub and then go home, and they'd think, oh, well, he's curbed his drinking, but they didn't know I'd go home to drink a hell of a lot more. Like, you know what I mean? You adapt to the situation, don't you?
We're skilled in that way. I'm not. None of us that get in trouble with the drinking are stupid or dumb. I think it's more of an illness where you adapt to your situation like any creature would, and you can camouflage yourself in. And if the camouflage isn't working anymore, you find a new environment and you get around it. So, I started isolating, and I did that for 4 more years, and it all got worse, and the lies and the cheating and the secrets started really gathering and wearing heavy on me. It was becoming so difficult and frustrating to carry on. I had to get my drink. I spent most of my waking hours obsessing about where I could get the drink and the drugs to help me stay up. And then when I could get them in me, the first few were so glorious, but I couldn't control the ending. Could never control whether it was going to be a big consequence, a blow up, bloody knuckles, a blackout. And I kept purging through. I didn't know about solutions. I didn't know about where I could go. And I was mostly in denial because, as an old wise king once said, he says, do you see a man who is wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than him. And I thought, because I'm in Hootie and the Blowfish, I'm successful. I'd started a family. I have a home with a couple nice cars out front that I'd paid for, that I was bulletproof, that I didn't need help. I didn't need your help to tell me how to live my life. And I was that wise man who was in trouble.
It's interesting how you describe it. You didn't know how you were going to go. I called that Russian roulette, because I was the same, Jim. Like, I could be in a really upbeat, happy mood and make everyone laugh, but I could just turn. And I was so kind of poisoned, you know what I mean? It was like, because I was drinking daily, I was just topping up all the time. So I never really, my nervous system was inflamed continuously. And depending on what had happened in the day or how I was feeling that night, whether I was tired or whatnot, I just didn't know where I was going to turn. And that's horrible, isn't it? For people around you as well.
Oh my gosh, that quick turn in personality change. And we, as the drinkers, I didn't always know what it was that was upsetting me. I would turn on a dime. And in my book that I released last year was just a story about being at this show in St. Louis, Missouri, and I've got some friends from my old soccer days there, and their kids, and I'm having the best time. And our manager's trying to get us out because we need to drive the tour bus up to Chicago for a very early morning flight, and something just switches in me and it goes dark. And suddenly I'm at his throat, yelling at him and telling him to F off. And I'm quickly after that punching a hole through a wall in the tour bus, and blood is flowing. And I don't know what made me snap. And that was part of the frustration. We say we get maybe sick and tired of being sick and tired. I was becoming sick and tired of it, but I didn't yet have a solution. I didn't know quite where to turn. I was just wanting my own self-will to be enough. You know, we have so many gifts. We can work hard, we can strive, and we can have our intelligence. But, you know, when it's the drink, it's a little more complicated, right?
It is. I can really relate to that. So where was your point that you thought that's it?
I had it about 4 times a week in 2003 and 2004. I was constantly convincing myself that's it. This is it. And I would sometimes promise it to other people and sometimes to myself. But the truth was, once that next evening rolled around, I couldn't stay away from it. I knew I was going to go after it. And I had some consequences. Our second child came along also, and that put a burden on our family and my traveling schedule. And so I was probably ready to make a move and unsure. I was just fighting my way till the end, and I didn't know which way it would turn, really. I luckily never had to consider, suicide, which is the way and many people end up in this period of frustration and wet brainness and bad decision making. They don't see an answer. And for those people, there's help too. There certainly is, but that wasn't going to be a route for me. I was going to go down fighting and swinging. And one morning I had a curious, and it was my last sort of, I guess, intervention. And it was from someone who you wouldn't really want to be getting intervened by if you're a 40-year-old head of your household. And it was my 4-year-old daughter at the time. Oh. And she didn't mean it to be an intervention, but I had, again, found myself detached from my family. I had built a little music studio behind our house, detached literally. And I would use that to go out after the kids had gone to bed and my wife was going to bed. And I'd say, I'm going to write a new song. Of course, I conveniently had all my booze out there that I was really more interested in. And I hadn't made it back after the Saturday night, late night session of staying up, writing some crappy song and being sad and drunk and alone. And my daughter came out to the studio about 10:30 in the morning on the Sunday, and she hopped on my chest. I was passed out wearing the same clothes I'd, worn the night before, reading her, her goodnight story. And I probably smelled horribly, like either smoke or booze or both. And she just hopped up on my chest and she said something she had said, I'm sure, many times before. And I'd always been able to answer it with some BS. She said, Dad, what are you doing? Dad, what are you doing out here? Or why are you sleeping here and the family's inside? She meant it very purely, as a 4-year-old would, naively. Why aren't you in the house with the family watching cartoons and having breakfast and laughing and having joy? Why are you out here separate? And I couldn't answer. I would always answer. I always had an answer. And on this day, something was sort of clamping my mouth up, and she got frustrated and ran off. And I was left with, me and that heavy, growing feeling that maybe I didn't know what I was doing. What are you doing?
I was still about to say that, Jim. That was probably the moment you thought, what am I doing out here in the same clothes on the floor at 10:30? That's what happens sometimes. And it's very crushing. Powerful. Children are so honest, aren't they? Brutally honest.
Yeah, I took that. It was more difficult than any of the interventions I'd had from my bandmates or my first wife or friends, because you knew it was honest. You knew she didn't have anything at stake except for her heart. And I sat there and I just said, well, I don't know what I'm doing, to myself, to maybe some God. I don't know. I was just in a bad state. And I made a quick decision, and I admitted to myself, I don't know what I'm doing. And I think I have to do the thing that nobody wants to do naturally, which is ask somebody else for help. And so I sort of drug myself down the stairs, ironically past a wall of Hootie gold records and accolades and achievements and Grammy awards. And I tell you, I looked at those things and they were meaningless. They didn't hold any power. I was a sick person that needed help, and nothing I'd ever done in Hootie the Blowfish was going to help me at this point. I needed what became sort of a spiritual surrender to say, God, I need some help. And I called, the one guy that I knew, who I used to party with, and had given me his phone number a few times. He did what some of the 12-steppers do as a result of their, recovery, which is to bring the message to others. And he had told me a few times, call me if you ever want to make a change, wink, wink. Call me if you ever want to get your life together, wink, wink. He knew I was struggling and suffering. He had done it himself, and he had found help. So I called him that day. He, of course, did what is sort of the responsibility of those 12-steppers, which is to, bring me a place that I can hear a message. And I went to this meeting that night. I tell you, I didn't know what to expect, and I wasn't sure they'd really have anything for me. But these people that were practicing these 12 steps and the power of transparency, which I had never had in my life, they were telling on themselves. They were talking about their missteps, their failures, their limitations, their weaknesses, openly and honestly, and not just to brag about them or make it seem like some glorious drunkalog, but they were also telling me they have a solution. And that was where my ears got perked up. And I said, what? You people are all telling me you drink like me, or you drank like me, and you've found some set of principles or steps that have led you out of that sort of crappy place. And I thought, I think I want this thing. I think I see all of you as sort of myself, but a better healed version. And they said, keep coming back. And I was, of course, drunk there, trying to hide that too, because I couldn't go to a meeting with other people and not be a little buzzed. I drank that day before going to the meeting, and they seemed so sincere, and I trusted it. And so when they said, keep coming back, I did. I found a meeting the next day. I didn't drink before I went to that one. And I started hearing what I needed to hear, which was what my problem might be, what the solution could be, and a step path between them, and I fell in love with that.
Amazing. And did you find yourself a sponsor at that meeting?
I was listening for several meetings. I did love what I hear. I was told, get a sponsor, try and hang out with some new people, stick to the winners, all the great sayings, live and let live that they're using in there. But as much as I wanted it, I was very sick, and I didn't know the depth of not just my bad drinking, but my bad thinking. And they told me to move from some old ideas to some new, better ideas. You need someone, a confidant, a sponsor. You need a group around you, which I was willing to sit in every day. But something about me, there was a fear and some pride that said, well, I like these meetings. I like hanging out with these people, but I'm not sure about getting deeply honest with somebody. That was I wasn't sure about that. And so it took me a while. I went to, they recommended 90 meetings in 90 days. I said, I'll go for that. And about 74 days in and 74 meetings under my belt, I started thinking, maybe I can dabble back in a little bit and try some research about my addiction. And I did. I went out and tried some, and I didn't like how that felt. I felt a little guilty. Like, I don't think that was in the spirit of recovery. And I called up my buddy, and he said, you should just start over and get a damn sponsor this time, and I did. I made a commitment to try and be as honest as I could. And that starts with asking another guy to sponsor me and walk me through the journey that he had already experienced. That was the main thing. You want to get somewhere, you talk to somebody who's been there. And
yeah, I love that, Jim, because for me, I've always been quite an open person and talk about things, but I was very closed because of my addiction. So, you know, all the secrets and the lies turned me into someone that wouldn't talk about it with anyone. And I
Right.
think I realized that for me to succeed in my sobriety, I needed to share my story. And I remember I was asked to do a talk in a pub 9 weeks after stopping drinking. Now, I've been drinking 40 years. Like you, well, no, you've been less, have you? Because you gave up in 2004, right? 40 years. And I remember going there and I was the last one on. There were 7 people speaking about different life changing things in their life, right? And where I was sitting was opposite the bar where they had my favorite drink, Peroni. And I was literally looking at it thinking, what am I doing? And I got up on this stage. I was shaking like a leaf, and I had an iPad because I couldn't remember anything what I was going to say. But at the end of it, Jim, the reaction from the people that were in the audience with a glass of wine, with a pint of beer, was astonishing. And the amount of people after that come up to me privately and said, "That's really inspired me to do something about my own drinking." And then I realized that that kind of connection, sharing your story is so important to put out there. And that really gave me a massive jump into doing other things. Hence as well, this podcast, you know, because sharing stories make people feel like they're not on their own. And that's so important.
The connection is key. I can't stress that enough. I was never going to understand or be, I guess, inspired to get help by anybody around me. They could tell me, you're an idiot, you're an embarrassment, you're out of control. None of that was going to help me as much as sitting in front of some people who had been on a journey and could educate me and inspire me and just show me that this is a way. They weren't forcing it down my throat. They weren't telling me I had to do anything. But to hear stories of people that were like-minded, had a struggle with control of their drinking, and how they had found their way out of that hole was exactly what I needed to hear. And I just needed to be informed that here's how people that might be like you do this thing if they want to get well. And yeah, some of us, it takes a long time. Some of us go back and we have to restart numerous times. I had to restart once, and that's okay. But I've never seen a place that was also more inviting to say, we're going to acknowledge our failures here. We're going to acknowledge our imperfections. And I'd never heard that in my church setting. I always got a little hung up that I was expected to be perfect. I was expected never to fail. And if I did, I sure as hell wasn't going to tell somebody about it. And here was the place that was doing something different. They were saying, tell us about it. Here's the only way we're going to heal is talking about it. And we men have the extra burden that I don't think many of us are naturally inclined to want to talk about our emotions and our feelings. So we've got that. I spend most of my days now talking to other men because we can share our affliction and we can learn. And as much as we may never understand the other gender fully, we can at least understand ourselves a little deeply.
It's funny you say that because I've got a little private Facebook group, and there was a guy on there the other day, and he said, "Where are all the men?" Because he was the only one apart from me. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it is fascinating that it's really difficult to get men to open up, but I think once you tap into it in the right channels, they're more willing. But you know, I think men are more practical, right? Let's fix this solution now. What do I need to do? Like fixing a fence in the garden, where, you know, women more openly want to talk about their emotions and that, and it's an interesting thing. But we're all working on it in this community to get men to talk more, and it's really important. And I think it's changing. You know, there's a lot of big groups now, men's groups to do with mental health, and you know, I think it is definitely turning. It's important.
And that's, I mean, honestly, for anybody that's out there, that's a man and saying, wow, yeah, you're right. I don't want to talk about my feelings. I have a hard time with that. 12-step model is built to do pragmatic things. It's in order, it's numbered. They give this isn't a religion anyone's trying to sell. It's not anything but a group of people who wrote down what they did and what happened. And it's very pragmatic. It is the opposite, really, of sitting there and just talking about your feelings. It's saying, do this thing, do this exercise, write down the truth, write down your inventory, your resentments, and then you do this, and then you do that. I felt it to be so perfectly ordered, like a manual to putting together a piece of IKEA furniture. And that's what I needed. Sometimes I struggled with some of the general principles and some of the biblical stuff, which I now see as very valuable. I thought it was just too loose. It wasn't focused enough. I need to know what to do. I'm a man. Tell me how to fix this. And I think the 12-step model allowed me to get in a place where here's how you fix it. You write this stuff down. You go talk to this person. You go out and make an amend, a retribution, a restitution. And it was pretty functional. I found it to be just so pleasing in that manner. And that's why the 12-step model has been co-opted by so many groups, whether you're a gambler or an overeater, or whether you have codependent relationships. That's why that model works for so many people, not just addicts, is because it is functional. It's orderly. It makes a little more sense.
Yeah, I've always said, and I'll stick to this, that there's a lot of it that you can use in life, no matter what's going on. Do you know what I mean? It's a formula that works, and, for me, I didn't go down that route. I tried AA in the beginning for a few weeks and that, and something just didn't feel right. And I've admitted since that maybe I should have tried a different meeting, different group. Anyway, I didn't end up too bad. The way I did it was connecting with community, and embracing it that way, doing more public speaking, saying my story and that. And that's what's worked for me. And, it's like there's a bit of an analogy I use about you and me meeting each other, having a coffee and say, right, let's go clothes shopping. And you take me into a shop and I go, do you know what, man, it's not really my thing. So let's go over here. And you come in and you go, well, that's not really my thing. That's how it is, right? And whatever works for you. And that's fine.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're just trying to heal, right? And there's many paths to healing. And I've seen it through my family and through my friends and people that have dipped into the 12-step model and chose a different way. People use church, people use the Bible. We're just trying to get honest. And that's the one thing that any of us that suffer struggle with is being gut level honest and saying, here's the ways I suffer and what am I going to do about it? And usually if you can get there, who cares how you get there? We just want to get there.
Yeah, 100%, mate. So now what, you're 19 years sober?
Yeah, coming up, I'll be 19. I'm between 18 and 19. I've worked with the same sponsor the entire time. He's kept me straight. He's, willing to be honest with me. Again, that's the key, is that we have a lot of friends and family that tiptoe around our issues, not just the drinking, our personality, our warped sensibilities that were out of line. We all struggle with relationships, but a sponsor is honest. They have nothing to win or lose. They're carrying a message that says, I get to stay clean if I help others. So he helps others. And now I get to do that too. And 18 years on, I've survived a long period of dormancy with the band, a divorce to my first wife. I've been happily remarried for 14 years, and we have 5 total kids between us. We did a reunion tour in 2019, which was hugely successful. I was around people that were partying 3 or 4 nights a week. And by then I knew how to protect myself. I knew where to find my peace. We brought our family mostly with us on the tour. We even, I was probably more stressed going back to the UK, because that was always a great place for me to just feel so worldly in a pub, drinking lager and talking to locals about my obsession with football. I always felt at home there. And I was, going back there to do some of the theaters we played, I was worried that I would miss that feeling. And there's people
association, around me. Isn't it? Like,
right.
The UK always gets the blame as well. You'd be coming up to me in the pub and be going, "Oh, where are you from?" Because you're terrible at accents, right? Were you Australian, Dave? So, mate, you've written a book as well, haven't you? Do you want to tell me about that?
Yeah, after a full decade, on this new journey without alcohol and drugs and some better thinking, I wanted to try and remember and share some of the things that were valuable, really, about the journey. And there's certainly some value in the fun story that was Hootie and the Blowfish. And I had kept a journal. I didn't journal or diary as a kid, but when we left to go record our first album in Los Angeles, I grabbed a little notebook and said, I'm going to write down our 2 months there, write down some things about what we do in case we never get back, in case that's the end. And I'd saved that journal. And 20 years later, I started paging through that and found some wonderful memories of some young and innocent guys in my band and me goofing off, dreaming, and also saw some hints of my addiction already. And when I read back, and I thought this would be fun to write about, give people the back story and what it was like being just one of a few guys that were trying to live our dreams musically, and how it exploded into something bigger than we thought it would be, and how I went down the road, dealt with fame and then no fame and then addiction and family and a great reunion. And so I started writing. It took me about 4 years sitting at my house. I was diligent. My wife was so helpful, Laura, and helped guiding me through what to say and what not to say. Sometimes the things we leave out are important as well. And so I would not try and hurt anybody by my words. And Diversion Books, an omnibus press in the UK, put out this book called Swimming with the Blowfish. And it's great. I think people are commenting that if they've ever had to seek resolve for their pain or illness or addiction, it's helpful. It's also a musical story, a funny story, because we had so much joy and camaraderie out there. These guys were my buddies, and we still are. Life changes and we go on, and you're more separate, but it's a celebration, really, of a cool time. It's a throwback for the younger generation to a period when there was no internet, there were no cell phones. I know. We thank God for that, and we wish we had documented some things, but other things we're glad we didn't get caught on video, right?
And camera phones. But do you know, I wrote my book and it was really emotional for me, because it was almost felt like, I don't know if you can relate to this, that I was on my deathbed looking back at my life, right? And all the things that had happened in my life. And it kind of really dug up a lot from the past, from when I was 14. I even put a letter through my address where I lived when I was 14 and asked whether I could go and have a cup of tea. Typical English thing. Can I have a cup of tea? And I was going to take around a bit of cake because I wanted to feel what it was like to be in the house that I grew up in. And I never actually heard Jim. So that was devastating. But yeah, I don't know if you can relate to that writing your book. Was there moments that you sat with it and thought, God, this feels so surreal visiting back? Was it really vivid for you when you was writing about the past?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I had to trudge through the reality of who I was. And honestly, recovery is a deep search of your soul, and it's a fact finding and a fact facing mission, right? We got to figure out who we are and what makes us tick so we can get better and change from old ideas to new. The book was that. I mean, I had some notes. I kept all these calendars, monthly day minders from the late 80s about where we had been as a band and where I'd been in my life, weddings, death. Part of the book is probably the most difficult part to write on was that at the height of my addiction, I was losing my mother. And I had many regrets on the time that I did not put into savoring those last moments when she was diagnosed as terminal, and I was too sick and too wound up in my music. And so I get to use that as a bit of therapy and write about it and remember, and it helped me and my siblings come together, and even my dad, to say, I got to make phone calls. I'm writing this book. Here's what I remember. Is this right? Is my memory correct? And I had some artifacts about that time, and I was able to go back and write, I think, which was a very touching moment for me and difficult of when we lose people and when we are simultaneously caught up in a disease, and how difficult that can be, and that there's, you know, a way to come out of it on the other end and find some peace. And I know you've probably found some of those same things, where sometimes the best thing to do is to write about it and to share it with.
Well, that's why I always say to people, journaling is really powerful. Even, you know, like every day, even if it's 2 lines on a bit of paper to get your feelings out, to start the day afresh, you know. Jim, I'm 100% going to get your book. It sounds absolutely fantastic. And in the UK, we can get it here.
Yeah, I'll leave you that link. It's through Omnibus Press, our publishers there, and they're based out of London. And so I will get you that information. And
Yeah.
there's always there's a couple links that'll be attached there for sure. I think Amazon UK is probably the easiest click, right? It'll be there
100%.
by lunch tomorrow morning.
Yeah, it's brilliant, actually. Yeah, I will do some stories off the back of this interview, Jim, and get that book out there, because I think it's brilliant. And I love your story today. I've thoroughly enjoyed every minute of your story. And I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to share it with everyone on here. So thank you very much, mate.
Thanks, Dave. See you soon.